There are 1,000,000 ways to die. We just wanna talk about it. Coneheads.
Welcome again to another Codeheads. We're excited to have you all with us.
We're almost up to 20 episodes, I think. That's remarkable.
Holy moly.
I know, 20.
I I can't believe it. I like that you count because
Well, I
I'm just
can't
going.
believe it. I really can't. That's a lot.
It
And
is.
it's and
And
it's
the fact that people are actually listening to us because the
that's a
conflict just,
bonus.
it is the conflict just kind of came out of a phone call when we were chatting, and then we
And
did it. And then
here we
so
are. Here we
here we
are.
are. Thanks to all of our listeners, to all
Thank
of
you.
you. We appreciate you. Yeah, we've gotten actually, I forgot to tell you, but we've gotten some emails with suggestions for topics and stuff too. So I gotta
Wow.
touch base about that, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad you like our deep dives on things and our thoughts. Um and we've been on a bit of a kick with, the history of CPR and kind of some of the darker side of history when we were talking about resurrectionists and whatnot. Um and we're we're keeping steady with that kick. So we are going to jump into that history of defib because it really goes along well with the history of CPR. They are kind of always thought of together in my head, at least,
Mhm.
even though they are two different concepts. But modern day, what's CPR without an AED? I mean, I guess it's helpful, but we like it. And where it came from is pretty interesting because, as Mike and I talked about in the history of CPR, a lot of the people that started to work on trying to figure out how to help people in sudden cardiac arrest a cajillion years ago were thought of as kind of quacks or kooks. And, even the concept of VFib was, is he right? And so it's really interesting. And we want to bring you through that history.
So VFib, just to explain, so when your heart suddenly stops beating, and instead of pumping in that rhythmic, coordinated fashion, those contractions, it actually starts to quiver. It twitches, and that is VFib. And without intervention, as we all know, it's fatal within minutes. So that's why we always talk about early CPR, early defibrillation. So VFib is a high energy demanding dysrhythmia. Chaotic electrical activity drains the myocardial tissues, ability to meet its metabolic demands. And if we don't get on it, it degrades into a systole. And when we wait, tick, 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 the less likelihood we have a survivor. But we can convert that to a normal rhythm if we act quickly, if we act competently. And that's where defibrillation comes in. So that's why we're breaking down the history, because now it seems so obvious. Shock it if it's shockable. But it was not obvious back then, and it was quite controversial.
That's true. And I was motioning that I'm the chaotic one with the high
Oh,
energy. But I'm not VFib. No, but that's really important, actually. You're right. And that's why in my head, the two are melded together because it's just, we know that that's the treatment. But back then they didn't. And they actually didn't even really know that CPR worked or how to really do it. Um, and that's why it's so interesting to me that really the first uh, foundation, really, for defibrillation was in 1775. And it was by this, he was a veterinarian, actually, primarily, but also a physician. I guess you did both back in the day, named Peter Christian Albegard. And he was Danish. And he started using electricity on animals, like on chickens and horses. And he used electricity to show that he could kind of induce fibrillation,
hmm.
so get the heart from, like, a normal rhythm that it was doing something wacky, and they were essentially dying, but with additional shocks of electricity, he could actually bring the animal back to life, which is pretty cool. 1775 is a long time ago,
Right.
and I could understand that people would think that was a little bit wild, that he was just electrocuting.
Yeah, to say the least, that's a little bit wild. Perhaps they thought he was a bit twisted as well. It put everything in motion. I mean, 5 years later, about 1780, Italian scientist Luigi Galvani, I believe that's how you pronounce it. He applied electric current to a frog's leg, and he noticed contraction, muscle contraction, and leg kicking. So he's noticing the reactions to the induction of electricity. Now, get this. This is a fun tidbit. So this idea that electricity and life were somehow connected, that captured the public imagination. And it inspired a young woman named Mary Shelley. 1818, she wrote the famous book Frankenstein. So she applied
Oh.
that concept of galvanism, which involved using electricity to stimulate muscle movement. And that idea reflects the fascination with electricity's potential to create life, because we are electric. So when you see Frankenstein next time, the movie adaptation, or read the book, you'll know where she was thinking. You know what might have inspired her.
What a fun tidbit.
I
I
know.
actually feel like for something like that, we need, like, tidbit. We need a little tune to, like
I mean, it's
because
right
that's
then, 15 years, 20 years after the chicken and the frog. So she was on it.
wow. Women rule. That's just
Yeah,
what that
great
comes
book.
down to.
Great book.
Yeah, wow. Oh my god, that's
Mm,
wild.
yeah.
Um, and, even though my mind is still blown about that, um, what also blows my mind is that in 1889, John McWilliam, he
Mm,
actually figured out that VFib, ventricular fibrillation, was actually a key mechanism in one of the most common reasons for sudden cardiac death, so sudden cardiac arrest. And so it kind of laid the conceptual groundwork or the ideas for people to be like, "Oh, maybe that guy in 1775 had a good idea with the electricity, and then we got the other guys showing that electrical, input directly on a muscle shows
yeah.
some sort of input and change. And if the fib is actually why people are dying, maybe we should put our brains into this."
That's it, and that's what's so interesting, because you're dealing with an electrical conduction issue, and to it's wild to think, so electricity that is causing the problem within is also the remedy.
It, it is. It is. Yeah. And that's why they probably feel like it was a hard thing to wrap your head around,
Oh, yeah.
um, back then, because it doesn't really make sense. Because usually you say, "Oh, if a little is good, more is better." That's
Yeah.
not always the case, you know?
No.
Um, but I guess here it is.
Yeah.
Um, but so our poor little Danish doctor electrocuting his chickens and horses was kind of looked at as a kind of a lunatic. But then these two Swiss physiologists in 1899 started to be like, maybe he was onto something. So we're going to try it in dogs. And so this Provost and Batelli, I'm probably butchering everyone's names, so I apologize, but they were at the University of Geneva, and they actually demonstrated in front of, a large audience at the University of Geneva that they could give a small amount of electrical shock to these dogs and cause VFib, and then give a larger shock to reverse it and restore a normal rhythm. And
Right.
so people were seeing it and watching it, but they were kind of like, how is that helping us? But it was actually regarded as the first scientific demonstration of defibrillation, even though it was on animals. Um,
Mhm.
but all of their work that is now proved pretty foundational for the, guidance and creation of modern day defibrillation, people thought they were like, wackos.
Mhm.
Um, but then maybe, in the 1920s, so cut forward, what, 30 years or so,
Mhm.
there was an electrical engineer at Johns Hopkins, and I'm going to butcher his name, William Kuenhoven, um, and he started studying electrical shocks, and he actually created the first external defibrillator concept in,
Mhm.
like, 1930, and he started testing it on dogs. And that's when people are like, "I think we're cooking with gas now. Now we've got something."
And what's William Koehoven? what's
Cohenhoven?
interesting is just think about this. So in the 1930s, more research was going into this defibrillation concept, not driven by altruism, but by industry. So what was
Correct.
happening is electric utility workers, they were dying from accidental electrocutions, and companies like Con Ed in New York, they wanted answers because they wanted to, to protect, their employees and, make money. So they funded the research, and, William Kuhoven was one of the era's central figures, looking into that. So it's interesting to see where that inspiration derived from.
Yeah, keeping people alive so they can work for you at, low
Yeah, he's like,
cost
"I need to
workers who
get this
don't.
done." Keep them alive, please. I'm
Yeah.
giving them
Uh,
crappy pay. We don't care about them, but we wanna save their lives, you know?
oh, the world has not changed much, has it? Uh,
No.
um, and I think that we're saying, William Koehooven's, name like we're the Swedish chef, but I'm kind of okay with it. I hope he is. But I do think that's interesting that he was funded, by Con Ed.
Mhm.
Um, and actually right after him, and I'm not sure that these brothers, that worked together, one was a physicist sorry, one was a cardiologist, and one was an engineer, Albert and Henry Hyman, and they developed something called the Hyman odor. What a jazzy name. But they actually wanted to create something that instead of this large, creation that, Kuenhoven, created, that gave direct cardiac stimulation with a needle, like, right into the heart, like, directly into the heart muscle. So an alternative to, some large machine, um, they would just pinpoint where they wanted to give the electricity.
Hmm.
And so they created that, and it had kind of limited use, I think, because of size. There were a lot of barriers. Size was a big thing,
Yeah,
which you'll talk about in a moment. But when people did use it clinically, it actually really worked. Um, and kind of that's like the beginning of EP is what I'm thinking about in my head.
true.
Um, you know,
And
um,
just one thing about we gotta get this. Kuenhoven's team at Johns Hopkins, they actually developed, and this is gonna tie in right with defibrillation, is external chest compressions, what we all call CPR, and that was published in 1960. So CPR and defibrillation became the twin pillars of resuscitation, just like today, what, 60 years later? Because what we're doing with CPR, what are we doing? We're preparing the myocyte for defibrillation by keeping the oxygenated blood circulating. The compressions then ideally prevent the heart from acidifying or fibrillating further. So when we do get to shock it, the shock hits tissue that is ideally less damaged. So it's interesting to see those two come together about 60 years ago and are still in place today and are the emphasis and of paramount importance for, resuscitative efforts.
Yeah, and the same team created both of these, right? So they
Right.
recognized that back then, like the
Wow.
importance in the symbiosis of both, which
Yes.
is pretty cool.
Mhm.
Um, and actually going along with it, because a lot of these things were created and they weren't, widely used. They weren't like approved for widespread use because it was, again, these people were looked at as a little bit like, wacky.
Right.
Um, but in 1947, there was, a surgeon at Case Western, Reserve University, named, Claude Beck, and he actually did the first successful human defibrillation, and it was
Hmm.
just on a whim, in all honesty. Um, he had a pediatric patient, this 14-year-old boy, who was having he had some sort of congenital heart, issue, and he was doing cardiac surgery on this, boy. Back then, they called it a chest procedure.
Uh-huh.
But whilst this kid was under and he was operating on him, he went into VFib. And so he went into a VFib arrest, and so Beck was like, everyone's like, "Oh, no," and they didn't wanna lose him, and Beck sent someone down to the basement of the hospital. It was like, "Hey, there's this device. It no one's used it, like, go get it." And doing what we do in emergency medicine and, critical care, I guess in actually all of medicine, but he did what had to be done and he improvised because there weren't any paddles, there weren't anything. So he found metal, like these tablespoons with wooden handles, and he connected them with like in the middle of the OR with this kid arrested. He figured out how to like connect them so
Wow.
that there was some sort of current going through them, and he
That's
placed the
wild.
exposed metal portion on the exposed heart, and he gave zaps of current, and he alternated the current through the spoons, and he revived him the second time he shocked him. So that was the first documented successful open chest defibrillation on a human.
That's incredible. I did not know the details with the spoons. Wow. And the fact that it worked. My gosh. Wow. Wow.
I mean, could you imagine if it didn't? They'd be like, "This doctor is a lunatic. He stuck spoons in my son's heart. My
Oh,
son is dying."
exactly. The fact that it worked, I wonder if he was surprised as everybody else. But
Oh,
there you
I'm
go.
sure he was, but he knew where this thing was in the basement. It was like, "Somebody go get it. Like, blow the dust off. Let's go." I mean, it's
That's
it
wow.
but that's the cool part of medicine is, and the cool part of the history of medicine is that, you know, people just trialing this stuff and testing it because there were probably other times that it could have been useful, but no one had the device, or they were like, "Oh, I
Right.
don't know where it is," or I don't have anything to give the electricity. And this guy's like, "Hey, go to the cafeteria, get spoon, with wooden handles."
And grab me a donut while you're at it. I'm starving.
I'll have a smoke while this happens,
Yeah,
'cause it's good for me.
seriously.
Back in the 1940s, they thought smoking was good, right?
Mhm.
And that's when Coke still had cocaine in it, so I think it was all good.
Ah, the halcyon days of medicine. That's right.
Yeah. Um, but I thought that was really, really cool,
Yeah.
that was the first open chest. But then, it got I think people were like, "All right, we're cooking with gas now."
Yeah.
This is like, we're not just onto something, like, we are onto something. We can really start to save lives and change that people are just dropping dead.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's when, I think you might know this, but there was a Harvard cardiologist. Mike and I grew up in Harvard hospitals, and Mike also works at a Harvard University hospital. And Dr. Paul Zoll, he actually did in 1956 the first successful closed chest external defibrillation on a human. So
Mm.
he figured out how to apply shocks to the chest wall, so they didn't have to have an open chest, no surgery needed. Um, and he successfully got a person back from VFib.
Game
And
changer.
yeah.
I mean, opening a chest is obviously a high risk intervention. And the fact, I mean, that's remarkable.
But that's what helped bring actually defibrillators into hospitals that were actually movable. And that guy Kuvenhoven down at Johns Hopkins, he actually created this prototype for a portable external defibrillator. I will say it was 200 pounds and it had to be on wheels. But imagine carrying that to a code, or somebody having to get that when they go to get the code card. But that was actually, in the late 1950s. And then in the 1960s is when actually they started being able to figure out that they don't need monophasic devices. They were able to figure out how to do biphasic waveforms,
Yeah.
and utilize them and pull them into, you know, truly portable. Well, I'm saying truly portable devices, but in Belfast, Ireland, in I believe 1967, they created their first like portable defibrillator that they could put in ambulances. So they
Right.
had actually these mobile intensive care units, as they called them. Um, and that's where emergency responses. That's like the birthplace of like
Right.
EMS being the first link in the chain of survival.
most people are dying from cardiac arrest prior to reaching the hospital. So, um, that was the inspiration toward that. So this, like you just said, we're bringing treatment to them. I mean, that's a novel concept and has totally, completely shaped the process and protocol today.
100%, because before that, EMS would be like, "Oh, this person's probably having a heart attack," and they just have to bring them in. They'd be like, "Oh, they're dead."
Yeah.
And and this 150-pound device, by the way, that was created in Ireland and put into these mobile critical care units, um, but it allowed them to shock at the point of someone having an arrest in their home, wherever they were.
Yep.
And so it did help to shave off some time there.
Big time.
And then actually in the 1970s is when these AEDs, as we kind of now know them, really became something. That's when they started actually analyzing heart rhythms and advising shocks. So people didn't have to be, staring at these EKGs or staring at these, heart rhythms and be like, oh, do we? Don't we?
Right.
Um, so you didn't need as trained personnel. And then in actually 1979, there were two doctors, Dyack and Wellborn, that actually created the first practical AED that was public facing. So the ones that gave voice prompts, automated analysis, and automated shocks,
Right.
because they were the ones that were like, hey, if now we don't need to train like highly trained EMS to do this and highly trained hospital staff because it'll tell us, regular people can do it too.
Right. And we know that benefit. Like when a bystander defibrillates within like 3 to 5 minutes, survival rates could jump to 70%. So waiting for EMS alone, we can't, if we have access to these public access AEDs, which are becoming more and more, prevalent, then we can address the situation. Because if they're not shockable by the time EMS shows up, it's pretty much most likely a done deal. Time is the enemy and AED is the weapon.
Correct. And that's what the AHA actually started. That's when they, in the late 70s and early 80s, is when they really started, saying to people, hey, bystander CPR, just start on the chest. Like, let's have regular people learn how to do CPR. You don't have to be, a highly trained healthcare professional. And so again, these intersect, these public facing AEDs, CPR, the AHA, all of it starts kind of coming together as kind of a package deal because people are
Yeah.
recognizing the benefit. Um, Although it wasn't until the 90s actually that the FDA approved biphasic technology.
Crazy.
Um,
Wow.
and in the 90s is when AEDs got smaller, more compact, easier to place in different areas for public access. And now, look at us today. It's, there's AED training programs everywhere. There's AEDs everywhere. I mean, I still wish there were more. Um,
Yeah.
but it's significantly helped the survival rates from out of hospital cardiac arrest. And it's all from one guy who might have been a little bit kooky electrocuting chickens.
Whatever it
I
takes to get us where we are today. That
and
chicken
I
made
don't
a
want
sacrifice, and we should
yeah,
be
and
great.
I don't want PETA after us, but I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything nasty to animals. I'm just saying, the guy had an idea and he worked with it. And, it really just shows this timeline just shows how defibrillation from, animal experiments and really kind of crude devices created these accessible life-saving tools that we all are benefiting from now.
And look where we are, like now. Like probably what 10 episodes ago, we talked about double sequential external defibrillation. That's brand new. That's a wild concept. Like we are doubling down literally on the pads and on the joule value. Here we go again, right? We're going to enter a new era. And that's what's so exciting is, the evolution and the trends of all of this, right?
Well, exactly, because there's an urgency and an innovation that drives process, and that's what I love, and that's why when
Yeah.
people get hung up on specific guidelines that might be saying, "Not yet," like, "We can't approve it quite yet," it's just because 'cause we're not there yet. But I mean, some people are doing it successfully, and we're gonna get there,
Yeah.
and we're gonna be another notch on that, history of in at some point.
Right. I
So,
mean, it's these vanguards that are, they're ahead of the game, and then eventually, standards guidelines, from like different bodies will then catch up. That's how I see it.
I agree 100%. So, keep innovating, keep forward thinking, and keep being a code head.
Yeah. Just keep at it. Yeah.
Until next time.
There are 1,000,000 ways to die. We just wanna talk